amid the climate crisis. This is the green economy.
All right, welcome to Smart 24 TV, coming to you live from plot 42, Nile Avenue. And yes, indeed, this is the green economy. Yet again, another episode of the frontier where we look into the green revolution, attaining economic success, but obviously having to put into mind how best we can utilize the ecosystem, the environment. So over time, we usually talk about industrialization, human activity, among other issues. But this is the program that brings you all that. So, like always, channel 394, GoTV, rather DSTV, and then channel 372 on DSTV. Welcome to Smart once again. So interestingly, in this episode, we shall be looking into a conflict that no other person has ever imagined. Now, biotechnology and then research, science, innovation have been critical to progress globally, not only in Africa. But the reception to science is quite interesting, especially with the people that don't really understand what innovation really means. It becomes really hard convincing them that science and technology is quite important. So the green economy this time around takes us to the crisis. In Uganda, we are looking at climate change. And then livestock, much as we don't usually care about it, it contributes a particular percentage to the greenhouse gas emissions, about 18%. So obviously, much as the methane, it doesn't last longer in the atmosphere. You could talk about a decade. It still amounts to the devastation of global warming. And obviously, the impact is quite devastating. So bringing together all these, previously we had the World Food Program, rather World Food Day, and then we still had the Climate Change Symposium. All these brought out the message that tends towards climate protection. But interestingly, there's a crisis. Food insecurity, the availability and then the affordability of the food is quite important. So you could talk about countries like Uganda that have always been the food basket. But as we progress further, this is becoming more of a challenge. And then we are no longer the food basket of East Africa and maybe Africa at large. Mozambique suffering with the effects of droughts. And then you talk about Somalia, it's quite synonymous. When you talk about famine, Somalia can't miss out. Ethiopia, Djibouti, the Horn of Africa are right into the effects that the semi-arid and then the arid areas are suffering from. Kalahari Desert, right into, when you talk about North Africa, the likes of Egypt, all paying the price, but agriculture. So to start with, let's take a look at what exactly the authority says in regard to climate protection, but still reflecting of the effects of food security. The famine, how much money we are putting into reviving the areas of Karamoja, and then the most ravaged areas still is quite interesting. So let's have a look at what the authority thinks the country at large should take care of in regard to climate protection and food productivity.
As climate change takes strides, global issues such as food security have burgeoned into inevitable challenges with a growing population, and the outcry is inevitable.
The impacts of climate change have been manifesting mainly in the form of prolonged droughts, unpredictable weather patterns. Previously, we used to know when rain would come. We used to know when rain would stop. Therefore, it's not easy to plan for agriculture activities, more so in a country where we are mainly depending on rain-fed agriculture.
Access to food is a basic right that mandates leaders and technocrats with an obligation of protecting the right of people to feed themselves in dignity with sufficient assured access and ensuring that the people adequately meet their dietary needs.
From the message from the minister, State Minister for Agriculture, and then the third Deputy Prime Minister, the Minister for Agriculture, that's Fred Chakulaga Bwino, they all gave us something to think about, obviously. So it's imperative information. Now, away from that, the message still goes on through the major people in authority. When you talk about climate change in Uganda, the Ministry of Water and the Environment is quite critical, especially when you look at the Climate Change Commissioner, or the Commission for Climate Change. And then the commissioner herself, that's Madame Mwebesa Athieno, Margaret. Recently, at the Climate Change Symposium, she had an interestingly imperative communication. Like they say, from their research, the temperatures have been rising. We talk about global warming, to put it collectively, from as early as 1995. And then the projections are still pushing for the same. So I think it's a general call. And then one of the major issues was telling the public, informing the public, that livestock seems to be one of the most underrated sources of greenhouse gas emissions. But obviously, like I said earlier on, it contributes about 18% of greenhouse gases. When you talk about methane, nitrous oxide, sulfur dioxide, and then the anthropogenic gases that come off cows, and then we could talk about other ruminants. So the communication is quite interesting. So how best can we achieve maximum agricultural output without damaging the ecosystem? It's interesting. So let's take a look at what the Climate Change Symposium had to say for us, and then bank on that as we move further with the program.
The lead up to climate change, largely of human activity, unregulated agricultural production inclusive, has had a repulsive effect on the agricultural industry.
Methane is being released when we destroy the wetlands, when we are looking after our livestock in a very unprofessional manner. Methane is being released, carbon dioxide is being released, sulfur is being released, waste management is so bad. We have a lot of gases now, the greenhouse gases, released into the atmosphere. Those gases are stopping the hot rays from going back into the atmosphere, into the space. So it causes warming within our atmosphere, within the earth.
This has, however, followed the threshold of rising temperatures that, among other factors, have forced changes in weather patterns.
We used to get the normal rains, the normal temperatures, but according to the records now, they show that the temperatures actually started increasing. And when we look at what was analyzed recently, the state of climate, which was analyzed for 2021, the results there are showing that actually temperatures are continuing increasing. And when I looked at this state of climate, the temperature started increasing slightly all the way from 1995.
Climate change is a phenomenon, not just for Ugandan farmers, but for the whole world. And what it means is that we need more resilience in our farmers. We have a very large smallholder farmer population. They are very vulnerable with the changes in the climate, and we need to be looking at the way that we can support them with diversification, with irrigation, and with better cultivation and production techniques.
Livestock production, for instance, accounts for just over 18% of global greenhouse gases, with methane a major, and the emissions cost is barely reflected in the pricing of animal products, milk, beef, hides and skins, among others. The case in Uganda has gained ground as global food insecurity becomes a critical issue of climate change.
The rate of population growth is ahead of the rate of growth of agricultural development. So that presents a big challenge as we move forward into future, because if that gap keeps increasing, meaning the food security issue will be exacerbated with the linked twin problems of malnutrition, and then it gets into bigger issues. So that gap has to be closed by research, closed by policies, favorable policies, which address these issues, and also adaptation measures.
The semi-arid areas, such as Karamoja, have provided a red flag for the rest of the country as famine-related deaths are registered and growing numbers of the malnourished.
Uganda generally is a hotspot for pests and diseases. For primarily one reason, we sit on the equator where the conditions are favorable not only for human beings and environment, but also for pests and diseases. They also like favorable conditions. Number two, Uganda is in a transition from equatorial forest, which is in Congo, to the savannas. So we're in a transitional environment in terms of the agroecological condition. So those conditions present favorable conditions also for pests and diseases. So when the issue of climate change or climate variability, it now exacerbates the situation where you get new variants coming, you get the pathogens changing, you get new variations of the pathogen coming, and those pathogens also evolve.
To pacify that communities, okay? They have been herded together. Okay? We are now trying to convert them from pastoralism to a settled agrarian community. It will reach there, but I think it should be gradual. As of now, in Somalia, in Turkana, in that dry belt, the Toposa community, the most adaptive production system for that arid and semi-arid area is still pastoralism. People don't want to hear this, but economics has even proved that sanity will only prevail if we allow those people to practice what they grew up practicing.
Now, as the impact grows, agricultural production is devising means to maintain itself within the relative modes of production, which is quite interesting. But there has been the science, the innovation, industries manufacturing pesticides. We could talk about the fertilizers, NPK, among others. There are herbicides that are so imperative when it comes to doing away with infestations for livestock. Key issues. So when it comes to the reliance on these elements, there is a pay for that. The price that comes off over-reliance and then the misappropriation of the different utilities. So the people that are into the industry, much as we are dealing with the negativities of climate change, the impact of the droughts, impact of the rain, heavy rains, there is a concern that most people have to take into their mind when it comes to food security, how much we need to produce to serve the growing demand of the population. Globally, we are talking about over 9 billion people that will be into this universe by 2050. 2050 seems far, but then it's quite near. So what does the over-reliance on these fertilizers, among other elements that are used in agricultural production mean? Let's have a clear look at this.
But as the gross effects of global warming pile, the agricultural industry has been severely hit. Arable lands declining, cropland productivity declining, thus the push for global research and innovation.
Since 2019, I think we have invested in not less than 170 million in only research for a finished product, irrespective of what, because we started this campaign in 2014. We have been rebranding the names, not until we came out with the technology. That's why we call it fertile soil.
During the process of introducing new genes, now this is what we call genetic engineering. The thing that I've told you about, that you can introduce new genes, and then you get new varieties that have traits that were originally not there. So that's what we are calling genetic engineering, or we call it transformation.
Now, as the impact grows, agricultural production is devising means to maintain itself within the relative modes of production, which is quite interesting. But there has been the science, the innovation, industries manufacturing, pesticides. We could talk about the fertilizers, NPK, among others. There are acaricides that are so imperative when it comes to doing away with infestations for livestock. Key issues. So when it comes to the reliance on these elements, there is a pay for that. The price that comes off over-reliance and then the misappropriation of the different utilities. So the people that are into the industry, much as we are dealing with the negativities of climate change, the impact of the droughts, impact of the rain, heavy rains, there is a concern that most people have to take into their mind when it comes to food security, how much we need to produce to serve the growing demand of the population. Globally, we are talking about over 9 billion people that will be into this universe by 2050. 2050 seems far, but then it's quite near. So what does the over-reliance on these fertilizers, among other elements that are used in agricultural production mean? Let's have a clear look at this.
Herbicides, for instance, if you look at 2,4-D is a known carcinogen, meaning it causes actually cancer. So to what extent and how, and do we know that it does that? Okay, many of these farmers just come and say, give me herbicide. Does he know it is even 2,4-D? What is 2,4-D? He doesn't know. And he goes and uses it, no protection, and he applies it today, and tomorrow he picks whatever a crop and brings it to the market. But the exposure to his own family and exposure to the community is real, and I think as a nation we should do serious soul searching and probably sensitization on the use with the view of minimizing their use or improving on how. We may not avoid them entirely, but the safety precautions should be emphasized and should be made aware to everybody that first of all they are dangerous, and if at all we are going to use them, then we must observe certain conditions for using them.
Biotechnology has been at the forefront, providing breakthrough for varieties that are not only climate resilient, but also productive.
We usually, for ethical, we prefer that we get those traits from fellow plants, and then we can identify those traits and introduce them into a new crop like cassava, which never had those traits initially. So this one is a faster way compared to, say, having a cross, a normal cross that is usually done. And we use, what you see here is bacteria. This is a soil bacteria, but it has been purified, so it's a lot of it. It's a soil bacteria. Usually you won't be able to see it. Yeah, so this soil bacteria is able to introduce new genes into a plant. And what happens when it does that, the plant is able to produce certain things that the bacteria will feed on. So it's like it instructs the plant that you please produce this kind of material for me to feed. So that's a soil bacteria. It's called Agrobacterium. So when scientists discovered it, they said, oh, now we could actually use this bacteria to transfer traits that we are interested in. For example, if it's things to do with drought tolerance, you could identify that trait from, say, a plant that grows in the desert. If that trait exists, then you're able to get the gene responsible for that, and then you're able to transfer that gene into, say, a variety of plant that you want.
So as we head into the break, there is something interesting coming up in the next part of this very program. We've talked about all this, agriculture contributing to greenhouse gas emissions, climate change, and then the fight to maintain it within the most modest spectrum of production. But there is a conflict, and interestingly, to to the people that are watching, it will be quite crucial understanding the eventual outcomes of this conflict, the biotech conflict. Now, the people involved in science are on two edges of factions. One is pro-biotech, and then the other is anti. So it's quite interesting. The people that are pro believe they provided us the solutions to the current problems. The respective famine being addressed with climate resilient varieties of seeds, both animals and then when it comes to crops. And NARO in Uganda, that's the National Agricultural Research Organization, has been paramount. So when we come back, we shall be looking into the battle against GMOs. So what exactly are GMOs? And then the people that feel that the pinch is about to get overboard. What do they really feel? And why are they against all this? And then what does the science say? So first, the break. When we come back, more of that.